Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming. And thank you, Michael. And may I also thank Simon Mills from the City Corporation. I owe them a huge debt of gratitude for what they have done in terms of helping me to prepare for this lecture, and quite apart from the materials and the discussions that we've had together. Simon will be moving the slide projection along for me, so we will be very coordinated indeed. For over 400 years, the Lord Mayor has had the opportunity to influence the intellectual life of the city as president of Gresham College. In today's case, through a lecture and a symposium, as you've heard. I'd like to nudge our intellectual attentions towards one of my chosen themes for the year, tomorrow's cities, and particularly measuring them. Perhaps some of you are aware that my day job is being an energy lawyer. And as a lawyer, I am, of course, obliged to charge for my time. Today, things are on the other foot. I'd like to give you 30 minutes of my time to set out a few thoughts prior to this afternoon's convivial conversation. By the way, although I am taking your time, I am not allowing you to charge for it. Why do cities matter? Cities are factories of the mind, driving innovation, creating wealth, and providing opportunity. Sir Terry Pratchett's Discworld fantasy series features a London doppelganger, Ankh-Morpork. Sir Terry's faux London is as full of life as an old cheese on a hot day, as loud as a curse in a cathedral, as bright as an oil slick, as colourful as a bruise, and as full of activity, industry, bustle, and sheer exuberant busyness as a dead dog on a termite mound. When you're asked to think about measuring or characterising cities, what do you think about? Population? Geography? Certainly. And maybe also height, speed, pollution, opportunity, and danger. I think about people. There is no city without people, and the wealth created by citizens together is what makes cities valuable. So why does measuring cities matter? Gresham College was the birthplace of the Royal Society, and a Fellow of the Royal Society, Sir William Thompson, better known as Lord Kelvin, starts our clock ticking. When you can measure what you are speaking about and express it in numbers, you know something about it. We're all familiar with modern management speak. What gets measured gets done. We manage what we measure. We value what we measure, or to measure is to know. But for Lord Kelvin, measurement creates the data from which information and knowledge emerge. I realise that measurement equally has its dangers. As Boyle points out so well in his book, The Tyranny of Numbers, we are often exact about some of the least interesting things, but silent on wider and increasingly important truths. But measurement remains crucial to our civilization. Professor Albert Crosby is a distinguished historian who attempts to explain why pendula of power swing. One of his books, The Measurement of Reality, Quantification and Western Society, 1260 to 1600, attributes the success of European cities to their invention of measurement, an explosion of quantification in numerous fields ranging from time, space, mathematics, visual perspective, music, painting, and even bookkeeping. Measuring cities is tough. In the UK, a city can be defined by its historic heart, its royal charter, its diocesan cathedral. London has two notable cities, Westminster and the City of London. We have twin cities in Budapest. Many cities, London and New York spring immediately to mind, have burst their boundaries and expanded by swallowing older villages and boroughs. Maps are commonly used to illustrate one or other aspects of cities in order to provide outlines. A city might be defined by its government's ability to provide security to citizens and its control of territory, such as the city walls of London or Rome's Seven Hills. Yet a city's defence may extend well beyond its walls or hills and spill over its islands or riverbanks. A city can be defined by planning. Who has the right to specify what can and cannot be built, what can be done or used on a property? A city can be defined by its ability to tax citizens. Yet many cities, such as London, have incomplete abilities to tax, while others, such as Los Angeles, are completely unable to tax much of their greater metropolitan area. A city can be where people work, forcing us to analyse economic value-added, travel time and commuting networks. A city can be a mutual dependence on a host of infrastructure, air, land, sea transportation, water, energy, waste, and communications. The City of London's residential population of a mere 7,500 is swelled by 1/3 commuters who travel here to work every day, with a catchment extending from Dorset to Manchester. Which reminds me of an excerpt from a 2010 United Nations university paper. Even though the municipal district of Chongqing in China has a total population of more than 30 million inhabitants, fewer than 6 million actually live in Chongqing city proper. Depending on which classification is used, Chongqing is sometimes listed as the world's largest city, and in other cases does not even appear in the top rung of urban population rankings. Measurement matters. How do we measure tolerance, diversity, innovation, and resilience? What happens if we get cities and their measurement wrong? In 1800, more people died in London than were born here. Only 3% of the global population lived in cities, and only one city, London, had a population more than 1 million people. This was largely due to its unique renewable transport system, the tidal Thames, which meant it was the only city able to feed 1 million people before the creation of railways. By 1900, 14% of the world lived in cities. By 1950, it was 30%. We crossed the 50% mark in 2008 and have over 400 cities with more than 1 million people. Demographers estimate that 70% of the world's population will live in cities by 2050. The growth of urban populations over rural ones is twofold. Not just importing people from the countryside, but also providing more opportunities for wealth creation. This has been the biggest city trend in the last century. I hesitate to point to one cause of this rapid growth, but one must give significant credence to our ability to control infectious diseases around the end of the 19th century. This, combined with the introduction of the railways, including metropolitan railways, better food storage, and better nutrition. Measurement is not easy. Take basic comparisons of population density. Manhattan is 3 times more dense than central London, but London overall is 50% more dense than New York City. And how do we measure the black or grey economies? Wealth, poverty. Some 1 billion people in the world may live largely undocumented and unmeasured in slums and favelas. Last year, The Economist argued that it was foolish to use public money to revive places like Hull, Middlesbrough, and Wolverhampton. People from Hull pointed out that Hull's city boundary is tightly drawn, so wealthier settlements on its fringes are excluded, and Hull appears poorer than it really is. Other cities, such as Leeds, have much looser boundaries that take in affluent villages. How can we make informed comparisons to help us make better decisions if we don't get our measures right? How do we protect cities from fire, flood, disease, climate change, economic crisis, social and political upheaval if we can't measure the basic data we need to make sensible decisions? We could end up under-providing, leading to poverty, disease, and ignorance, or over-providing, wasting our very scarce resources. We often count and classify when we could measure through metaphor. I've heard metaphors comparing cities to musical harmony or sonic discordance, communities, marketplaces, machines, energy processing engines, living cells, and places of worship. My preferred metaphor is the city as a clock. Clocks are a particularly strong metaphor. Long Finance itself was inspired by the Long Now project to build a self-sustaining clock that would last 10 millennia and give people a sense of time. When London was founded, sundials, clepsydra, water clocks, or candle clocks were the very latest technology. Let me take you on a Dickensian hopscotch through a ghost of cities and clocks, past, present, and future. Clocks and their bells and towers were vast social projects proliferating throughout Europe around 1270. Salisbury Cathedral has had a clock since 1306. Its current clock, dating from 1386, is the oldest working clock in England. Cockneys are those born within the sound of Bow Bells, and London has the oranges and lemons rhyme for several church bells. That's St. Clement's. It's actually my ward church in the ward of Candlewick. Our oldest business is the Whitechapel Bell Foundry, forging church bells from 1420 and casting the Liberty Bell and Big Ben. Cities with clocks and bell towers had a beat of commerce. We could meet in the market at noon, not some vague idea of midday. We could exchange ideas. Efficiency and innovation increased markedly. Cities achieved better economies of scale. Starting with the weavers in 1155, guilds focused on measurement and quality. The pendulum of trade in the city swung to the beat of volumes and lengths, weights and hallmarks. Which impels me to mention the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers, founded in 1631, whose motto underscores our metaphor, tempus rerum imperator. Time is the commander of all things. To see the ghost of cities past, we can visit the wonderful Clockmakers Museum in the Guildhall and explore how a world-beating industry thrived, one which gave us longitude, dominion of the seas, and manufacturing precision. So then, to the clock's present. Today, we trade in less than 10 milliseconds, which helps keep the city high in the Global Financial Centres Index. But the clock is ticking for slow cities. There is fierce competition amongst cities, in talent, in infrastructure, and in connectivity, skills, electricity, airports. In 1991, my law firm was commissioned to advise on both the Hong Kong International Airport and Terminal 5 at Heathrow. Hong Kong Airport opened 7 years later in July 1998, and the much smaller Terminal 5 project did not achieve planning permission for another 3.5 years in November 2001. Construction started in 2002, and it opened in 2008. The ghost of clock's future is wound up inside our networks. The defining technology of our generation is, of course, the internet. At the heart of every computer lies a clock. Every network has a beat. The ghost of clock's future resides in the network, and the network resides in clocks. Professor Barabashi at Notre Dame University sees our future in networks because, if nothing else, of their resilience and robustness. He says, most systems displaying a high degree of tolerance against failures share a common feature. Their functionality is guaranteed by a highly interconnected, complex network. Cities are, somewhat contrary to pub discussions, greener than rural areas when populations are compared on carbon, water, waste, or energy footprints. Economies of scale can help reduce our impact. Our dense populations are smarter about resource usage and the triple bottom lines of commerce, social well-being, and the environment. Measuring up the power of data, information, and knowledge. So, on what will cities depend in the future? Glaser challenges the view that accumulation and labour are the key factors in economic growth, emphasising rather the human capital and flow of ideas that urban environments foster. I believe that cities need to follow companies in adopting network models and flat structures over hierarchies. There are two competing approaches to getting smart that I like to term the Wizard of Oz and the hippie entrepreneur. The Wizard of Oz sees smart cities as a super-connected, super-centralized system in which the Emerald City's mayor hides behind a green curtain seeing all and controlling all in order to ensure the smooth running of the metropolis. By contrast, the hippie entrepreneur believes that data wants to be free, that smart cities give free access to all civic data so that 1,000 innovative flowers can bloom. I do not know whether the wizard or the hippie will prevail, and I could argue for a bit of both. But all of the great networking projects are collaborative. It's no surprise to me that open source software drives most of the internet, nor that peer-to-peer technology, when we get it appropriately going, is so strong. Clocks are a very strong metaphor, but as E.E. Cummings tells us, believe me, dear, clocks have enough to do. So I'd like to leave you with a final semi-liquid metaphor blending cities, clocks, commerce and networks. Cities as data hydrants. Cities have always been places that generate data in vast quantities. Data is the ultimate renewable city resource. Cities are places where people get the measure of things. Data ignites ideas. The Royal Society could only have been founded in a city. The intense clustering in cities presents urban dwellers with more opportunities and decisions on a daily basis than some rural dwellers might have in a year. However, these opportunities depend on a common wheel of data. Peter Head refers to our creating collaborative intelligence, which we can use to create collaborative consciousness and achieve collaborative change where it is needed. We have seen great examples of how freeing data for widespread use transforms our lives, maps, music, books, films, courses, directories, and so on. To avoid over-focusing on the internet, I'd highlight another data hydrant for us all, the United States Department of Defense freeing up access to GPS, the Global Positioning System, which has changed everything to do with transportation. Data irrigates ideas. A place with a lot of data becomes the transaction hub of choice. We need data for smart grids of food, energy, water, transportation, pedestrian movements, air quality, and waste. We need smart data to provide the raw materials for big hypotheses we can test and big theories we can deploy to meet our challenges. Big data, the use of computing power to provide automatic insights into large or complex data sets, is the new Big Ben. Transport for London created a data hydrant for trains and buses. A number of innovative London firms played with the data and turned it into information on the smartphones you have in your pockets, and hopefully they have been turned off. Freeing data made London a global centre for software development of public transport apps. How we gather and exchange data might define a city. Our new city wall is a data wall. Our new reservoir is our data store. Perhaps on entry to a city, we should contract to provide movement information from our smartphones to help transport planning, a mobile app passport. If I build a block of flats, I must provide ways of sharing energy, occupancy, or waste information with the city, which it anonymizes, stores, and then shares more widely. I can link up with neighbours to consider new power or water treatment plants because I have the data on local communities on local consumers, their needs and their usage patterns. There are, of course, liberty and security issues in sharing all this data that I've mentioned. But more open data could transform London. Perhaps, dare I say it as a lawyer, we should be freer with land registry data. Perhaps we should be putting obligations on planning approvals for sharing data. Perhaps utilities should have the data sharing obligations in exchange for their quasi-monopolies. Unless we collaborate on data, we can't compete in the long term. And in closing, I wonder if modern cities should shift metaphors from clock towers and bells to sharing and drinking from their data hydrants, moving along the path from data to information, to knowledge, and dare I say it, from there to wisdom. Thank you.